Hey, Uncle Dan.
Yes, Uncle Doug.
You seem like you're in a good mood.
Are you threatening me?
I'm not.
But let me fix that for you.
I feel like last week we all got the good news that we don't have to accept Hitler as one of us in terms of atheists.
We don't have to.
We don't.
No.
We can if we want. The Christians sure want us to accept him.
He's not all up in our Sudetenland. That's that. I think we laid that to rest. But
now, Uncle Mark, I guess you're going to try and ruin some other stuff.
Just bum us the fuck out. Why not?
I think it's going to come full circle. I think it's going to come all the way around because it's an interesting one. It's an interesting one. So this is the follow up to my 2-part. And look, I swear to fucking God, next week I will do something stupid and fun. I'll do another cryptozoology or something. But we just got to knock this out because this is kind of important, and this is always laid at our feet, right? So last week, as you guys mentioned, we delved a single German toe into what author Michael Sherlock calls the atheist atrocities fallacy when we dug into the lie that Hitler and his Nazis were atheists.
Yeah.
I think we very conclusively rolled over that faster than the Maginot line. He wasn't, they weren't. Don't let your Christian aunt on Facebook get away with that bullshit. So that leaves us with 3 of the other truly horrendous 20th century despots. And, there were tons of 20th century despots, but we're just picking a few.
The fun ones.
We're talking about the giants, right? The monsters of rock.
The Fab Four.
The Fab Four. So if ginormous body counts are what qualifies anyone for that nightmarishly exclusive club, and these 3 forged overtly atheist, quick note, that's also pretty complicated, communist regimes. Now that you can easily knock down your Christian aunt's Facebook assertion that the Nazis were atheists, they were not. Listen to episode 123. What about Joseph Stalin, Mao Zedong, and their crazy motherfucking country cousin, Pol Pot? How can a skeptic or atheist argue the charge that these regimes that killed tens of millions of people were atheist? And can we mount such a defense? Well, first, let's meet these 3 murderous shitbags one by one.
Yay!
First, Josip Bessarionis Djugashvili, more commonly known by his stage name, Stalin, meaning man of steel.
Ooh, I didn't realize that was what that was.
Yeah, not covering for any insecurities there.
If Stalin means man of steel, what does Putin mean?
Man of poo.
Spider-Man.
Before becoming a street thug and robber in the service of the Russian Communist Party he would one day rule, Stalin was an above-average student at an Orthodox church-run prep school and later voluntarily enrolled in a seminary in the pursuit of becoming an Orthodox priest, where he spent 5 years studying before declaring his atheism, joining the Bolsheviks, overthrowing the Tsar, and in a few short years winning a power struggle to succeed Vladimir Lenin as the supreme leader of the officially atheist Soviet Union in 1929.
It mirrors my own story so creepily.
It stands like, hold up. Who are we talking about here?
It's like I'm looking in a mirror here.
I think you will find this entire segment is me holding up a mirror to you, Uncle Dan.
Yeah,
so
probably.
Strap in. So he gained his position in 1929 and held it until his death in 1953. During that time, he unleashed all manner of terrors on his own people, from purges to famines to deportations and forced labor, etc., not even counting the stupendous loss of Russian life in the Second World War. He is responsible for a hard-to-pin-down number of deaths in his country that are in the many tens of millions.
So above 6, at least.
Well, probably. I think the high estimate is 45 million or something like that of non-war deaths. But I think more people think it's conservative 30.
It's amazing when you round off to the nearest 5 million.
Right.
You've really hit it.
You've achieved something.
Yeah, it's white label level of achievement.
Yeah, so talk about government goods and services, this guy. So second, Mao Zedong. The only one of these 3 devils that didn't change his name via some road to Damascus moment, this son of a prosperous peasant joined the ranks of young Chinese intellectuals who were fed up with the feudal abuses of the crumbling old King dynasty, with its brutal landlords and the lawlessness of rural warlords. They were also enraged by the thefts and humiliations that China had long suffered at the hands of Western colonial powers, who seized all of China's ports and profits, and in repayment, gifted the Chinese with aggressive, culturally erasing Christian missionaries, which they were rudely less than grateful for.
It is rude.
It's so rude. Mao weathered and basically won a horrendous civil war, became a legend with his 6,000-mile-long march, battled the nightmarish Japanese incursions and massacres of the Second World War, finally declaring himself the head of the officially atheist People's Republic of China in 1949, a post he held until his death in 1976. His brutal policies and idiotic miscalculations led to the deaths of several tens of millions of civilians. His creation is the only one of these three political systems still in place today, having celebrated its 70th anniversary. You're 70 years young, China. Keep it up. Third,
I just love the idea of declaring yourself the leader of the country.
I do. I love that.
You have to be positioned right for it, but there's going to be a moment when I'm going to do it. I'm going to declare myself the leader of this country.
Would you do it? You do it soon.
You're going to pull. You're going to pull a Super Del Shanzi and just go for it, huh?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, even Uncle Dan is probably better than Trump, which is saying a lot.
I fucking go for it. I'll
take that risk.
Vote. Third, Seloth Tsar, also known as Brother Number One, and most famously, Pol Pot. He was also the son of a prosperous farmer in the lovely Cambodian countryside. He, too, attended religious schools as a boy, first spending 18 months as a novice Buddhist monk, and then 6 years in a French Catholic primary school. He had family connections to the royal household of French-occupied Cambodia and lived a relatively privileged young life. In the years after World War II, a period that was, for many reasons, hugely disruptive to both colonial France and Cambodia, Pol Pot was studying in Paris. He joined communist student groups and tried to read Marx, but found it too difficult to understand. Me too, Pol Pot. Me too. But he found the more accessible, belligerent writings of our friend Joseph Stalin an enjoyable read somehow. Having been kicked out by the Japanese, France reclaimed Cambodia as a colony after the war. This was a seriously agitating event to young Cambodian leftists like Pol Pot. He headed home, got involved in politics, and a few zigs and zags later found himself and his little gang exiled to the forest, where they spent a few years getting way into their own fevered heads and came up with some ideas that they should have thought through a little bit more.
Wow, in the forest. That's crazy.
Yeah, they were huddled up in a very remote region on the Thai border. So by the early 1970s, the destabilizing clusterfuck of the utterly pointless American war in neighboring Vietnam and its spillover violence in neutral Cambodia was the spark needed to unleash Pol Pot and his Khmer Rouge, which just means the Red Khmer. That's their national identity, the Cambodian people. The Red Khmer, Khmer Rouge, a regular army on the weak, U.S.-backed government of President Lon Nol and the figurehead king. Pol Pot declared himself, much like Dan is about to, the head of state of the newly christened Democratic Kampuchea in 1976. Despite this clause in the new constitution, and I quote, "Every citizen of Kampuchea has the right to hold any belief in religion and has as well the right to have neither belief nor religion. Any reactionary religion interfering with democratic Kampuchea and her people is strictly prohibited," end quote. The Khmer Rouge aimed to eradicate all colonial religions and its local brand of Theravada Buddhism completely. Well, almost completely, and there's a very important almost. Okay, now we've met the cast, let's get down to the plot. Were these fuckers atheists? It's clear from the declarations and writings of both Stalin and Mao, yes, they very much were. In the case of the weirdly quiet and reclusive Pol Pot, no evidence of his personal declarations of atheism can be found, so his personal convictions can't be proven conclusively. Were the nations these fucks forged in oceans of blood, or their fanatically devoted followers atheists? This is where it gets sticky and nuanced, and we all know your Christian aunt on Facebook does not do nuance, so this might be a losing battle with her, but not every battle worth fighting can be won, I think Braveheart said. Or not, whatever. So, history is really just a record of reactions or overreactions to whatever the previous reaction to the thing before that was. It's the macro version of individual human nature. Groups of humans normally act in ways individuals might in similar situations or to similar stimuli. The communist movements and revolutions of the 20th century were just that, reactions to what came before them. And what was up in Russia, China, and Cambodia that these three fellas were reacting to? Well, in Russia, the Romanov monarchy and the fraction of the 1% that had any money or food in the country were carrying on like the party would never end, while the masses suffered and toiled like animals and were treated as less than that. And helping prop up this unsupportable, bloated monarchy was the bloated tick of the Russian Orthodox Church. It was as eager to suck every last red blood cell out of the general population as the clueless aristocracy was, and they made sure to put the fear of eternal hellfire into the masses every Sunday should they ever dare to question the system God had ordained them to live short and brutal lives in. In China, the deteriorating power of the emperor had long ago lost the love of the toiling peasantry, and their only interface with the monarchy were brutal tax collectors and ruinous landlords from which there was no protection. On top of that, the constant war and political strife of the 20th century, along with the theft and abuses of foreign imperial powers and their aggressive Christianity, and the prevailing religious philosophy that boiled down to, you deserve whatever shit you get, was leading society to a breaking point of some kind. And in Cambodia...
Of the good kind, really. I mean, it's that can only go well.
Well, it's kind of worked out in a funny way, but in Cambodia, the long, fairly stable co-rule of the monarchy and the Theravada Buddhist priest class had been seriously upended by French colonialism and the overspill of American mechanized bombardment from Vietnam. And like in Russia and its parasitic Orthodox Church, the recently deposed monarchy had been cemented in place with the cooperation of the Buddhist order.
You're welcome.
You're so welcome. And like in Cambodia, the other two countries had been struggling badly with modernization and technology, encroaching on ossified and archaic systems of government. So, armed with the ideas of the triumph of the working class and tearing down everything that oppressed it, obviously the communists tore down the state. And when the church is just another instrument of state enforcement, basically indistinguishable from the state, you fucking tear that down too.
Which, by the way, Russia's right back to that now.
Yep.
Yeah, and the Orthodox Church has come roaring back under their new czar, right?
Yep.
In similar ways, and in all the varying local flavors we've discussed, each of these three monstrous personalities entered the world stage in a fugue of destruction, but it was in pursuit of a utopian creation. And each one of them, while overtly destroying the old ways, found operating systems in place that the mostly rural masses of their respective countries had been programmed to respond to. Where Hitler left the church essentially in place and co-opted it intact to achieve his ends, these air quotes atheist despots smashed most of the hardware but found the software of great use. In his very prescient 1938 treatise, Politischen Religionen, philosopher Erich Vogelin coined the term political religion to describe the emerging totalitarian regimes of the early 20th century. Vogelin contends that the demand for total societal change they represented is in fact a spiritual movement. So radical were their demands, especially in the Cambodian case, that all aspects of life fall under the central control of the state, that they could not have even been partially effective without a sort of deification of the charismatic leadership. George Orwell, as deep a thinker about totalitarianism in theory and practice as this world has ever produced, wrote in 1946 that, from a totalitarian point of view, history is something to be created rather than learned. A totalitarian state is in effect a theocracy, and its ruling caste, in order to keep its position, has to be thought of as infallible. But since in practice no one is infallible, it is frequently necessary to rearrange past events in order to show that this or that mistake was not made, or that this or that imaginary triumph actually happened.
Point of order, you say no one's infallible, but there's an entire country of North Korea that knows for a fact.
Well, just pretend you didn't say that. We're going to get there. So as we know, no one is infallible, and it is generally not a word attributed to mortal men other than the baffling problem of two popes we have at the moment. So Stalin and Mao, seeing the path centuries of religious beatings and repression had burned for them in the minds of the servile masses, just pushed the statues and icons of religion off the altars and replace them with the red star of international communism, and then in short order, their own images.
Yeah.
In an odd quirk, Pol Pot didn't play at that level. He didn't really develop the same cult of personality. In his case, the particular fatalism that Theravada Buddhism had bred into generations of the Khmer people allowed him and his very tiny, very mysterious inner circle, there were only 3 of them, to replace the enlightened super beings of the Buddhist practice as dark corollaries shrouded in the depths of the Cambodian wilderness. Pol Pot biographer Philip Short wrote of the Buddhist-like communist hell of democratic Kampuchea, and I quote, dreary and joyless as it was, certainly, but that was what its leaders intended. Theravada Buddhism taught that nirvana, the realm of selflessness, could be attained only when the, quote, thirst for existence, made up of worldly and emotional attachments, had been totally extinguished. Under Pol Pot's rule, love, sorrow, anger, passion, and all the other feelings that made up everyday life were seen as emanations of individualism to be banished for the collective good. In some parts of the country, it was forbidden even to laugh or sing. In pursuit of illumination, the people had to suffer. So, just for a quick note, for those who might not know, the hyper-radical programs of the thankfully short-lived Pol Pot regime meant to totally reorder all of society overnight. And to them, that required evacuating the cities of every single person, separating families from each other permanently, segregating men from women, and forcing everyone into subsistence agrarian slavery to purify them of their prior lives. Anyone suspected of foreign influence was killed outright, along with tens of thousands of monks. The old became instantly suspect, and the power over life and death were granted to newly minted 15 and 16-year-old army officers who doled out the death sentence for real or imagined infractions or no infractions at all. 1/4 of Cambodia, that's about 2 million people, were randomly murdered or starved to death in under 4 years.
Wow.
So, in God is Not Great, our friend and writer Christopher Hitchens addresses what some would call the atheist atrocities fallacy and the phenomenon of political religions head-on, writing, communist absolutists did not so much negate religion in societies that they well understood were saturated with faith and superstition as seek to replace it. The solemn elevation of infallible leaders who were a source of endless bounty and blessing, the permanent search for heretics and schismatics, the mummification of dead leaders as icons and relics, the lurid show trials and that elicited incredible confessions by means of torture, none of this was very difficult to interpret in traditional terms, nor was the hysteria during times of plague and famine when the authorities unleashed a mad search for any culprit but the real one. And of course, my note here is the culprit was very often them, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And here's a brief summation of the issue from the increasingly hard to love Sam Harris. People of faith often claim that the crimes of Hitler, Stalin, Mao, and Pol Pot were the inevitable product of unbelief. The problem with fascism and communism, however, is not that they are too critical of religion. The problem is that they are too much like religions. Such regimes are dogmatic to the core and generally give rise to personality cults that are indistinguishable from cults of religious hero worship. Auschwitz, the Gulag, the killing fields were not examples of what happens when human beings reject religious dogma. They are examples of political, racial, and nationalistic dogma run amok. So, these air quotes atheist dictators removed a remote, capricious, unpredictable God that people were trained to be afraid of and replaced it with a very real, very much more dangerous man-god who demanded unquestioning, even hysterical veneration, and in most cases demanded even greater tribute in tax, toil, physical, spiritual, and intellectual freedom than the vague God they replaced.
Yeah.
Their portraits and spies watched over you while you worked and slept, and it was by Comrade Stalin or Brother Number One's good graces you were given life and sustenance. And this is called atheism? All 3 of these men ordered programs for which all scientific, sociological, and statistical evidence was clearly to the contrary, causing some of the greatest famines ever, economic collapse, military calamity, and near societal implosion. And this is evidence of rationalism or evidence of any kind of reason at all? No, I don't think it is.
Well, I don't think that atheism has to be rational, but yeah, I get what you're saying.
Yeah, but if one of the definitions of atheism is rationalism or reason, none of these are that, right?
Right.
Indeed.
So these were irrational, anti-intellectual hellscapes driven by reactionary, egomaniacal, political fundamentalists immune to reason who could not rest until they reshaped society in their twisted personal images, like the God of the Old Testament. They were all reacting violently to the atrocious abuses of the church-state machinery that preceded them. Any level of violence and human suffering was acceptable to create their vengeful, nightmarish utopias. These were not intellectually curious, skeptical men searching for rational, reasonable solutions that would do the most good for the least harm. And as Dan was alluding to, if atheism can be described as a search for reasonable explanation to life's questions, this shit wasn't it. Quoting Harris again, "There is no society in human history that ever suffered because its people became too reasonable." Right. So let's end on this little test of how to tell if something's from a godless communist dictatorship or a classic religious deity myth. You ready, fellas?
Well, this is a multiple choice episode, isn't it?
Quizzy sort of day.
Yeah. So how would you categorize a being whose birth on a sacred mountain affected a double rainbow to appear above it, and cause birds to sing their praises in human language, and the dead of winter suddenly turn into the blossoming of spring, and upon whose birth appeared a new star in the heavens? A being who never once urinated or defecated, who could change the weather on a whim, who wrote 1,500 perfect books and 6 perfect operas in just 3 years at college, a being who could drive at age 3, made 11 holes in one on their first golf game, cured both AIDS and Ebola personally, and invented the hamburger? If you guess this being is a god, you're 1/3 correct, because these are the 4 real claims made by the officially atheist government of communist North Korea about their now holy trinity of portly man gods, the Kim family.
Yes, indeed.
Is this atheism? If atheism means a lack of belief in gods, I'm going to go with no. Is it religion? I mean, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sure if anyone's ever seen the videos of the people crying in the wake of Kim Il-sung's death,
yeah,
that's the most religious society the world's ever produced.
Yeah.
I mean, I've read accounts of people leaving North Korea and years later still being afraid that Kim Jong-un would be able to read their minds, know where they are, and zap them somehow.
Wow. That's supernatural belief, right?
Yeah.
That's an irrational belief in God. So, what would I tell your crazy Christian aunt on Facebook about Stalin, Mao, and Pol Pot? Were they personally atheists? She gets a qualified 2 out of 3 on that. Were the movements these 3 inspired atheists? To paraphrase Uncle Dan, a few shows back, can you really be an atheist if you consider yourself God? And are your followers really atheist if they think you are? And that's a no from me, dog. So that's told you it was nuanced. It's a little bit weird, but it's not an affirmative yes.
Interesting.
Yeah.
A fascinating apologetic to squirrel our way out of being associated with those guys. I like it.
Yeah. It's a real snappy, quick one, isn't it?
Yeah. We need to work on that. We need to work on the messaging maybe a little, but that's okay.
Yeah, well, not all of life's answers can be delivered in a tweet, I'm sorry to say. I've tried. So there you go, fellas.
Well, thanks.
That was great.
Uncle Mark, we appreciate you, and let's move on.
Moving on.
Let's move on.